Hey, thank you, Steve. Great song. Thank you, Ken, for the wonderful prayer. Jay, the great announcements. We appreciate you, man. Appreciate everyone that is with us tonight over your telephone system, cell phone program. We're grateful that you're with us, and we hope that, as Jay said at the beginning of the announcements, you had a great day and got a little leaky there this afternoon, but we are thankful for that because we certainly did need that rain. God blessed us with a good rain, and we appreciate that so much. Ben Franklin, one of our founding fathers of our great country, the United States of America, really was a very intelligent man. He was a wit, he was a sage, he had great wisdom. He also had a lot of good comebacks to and for people that tried to speak against him. And one day, while he was out talking about the Constitution, and he did a lot of, in the early days, he did a lot of talking, a lot of lessons or a lot of speeches about the Constitution. After really giving a really good speech one day, there was a man that walked up towards the platform where Ben Franklin was, and he said, "You know, those words you said, they don't mean anything at all." He said, where's all that happiness that you say is guaranteed us? And Franklin smiled, kind of looked kindly at the individual, and quickly replied, "My friend, the Constitution only guarantees the American people the right to pursue happiness. You have to catch it yourself." You know, that's very true. Happiness, joy that we have to pursue it. It's offered to us by God. This evening, I want us to talk about being a full joy. Now, not joyful, but a full joy. When we think about joy, we understand that joy is the delight of the heart that is really experienced by an individual that walks with God in his integrity and truth. The forgiven person, the child of God, the Christian, rests in the peace that God gives, in the peace that is renewed, in that oneness that we have with God. And we are then comforted by his truth. And as his helper, he helps us through life so that we are full of joy. The Bible gives us some interesting verses that talk about this being our joy. Now, this is not the usual, you think about, oh, I know what he's going to talk about. If we're going to be full of joy, we got to smile, we got to be happy, our hearts got to be content. These are a little different. And so I hope you'll follow along with me. If you've got your Bible handy, you'll follow along with me. And if not, you'll at least follow along in thought. This will be good. In order to be a full joy, you have to sacrifice. Jesus sacrificed. He sacrificed position. When he came to this world, Paul said in Philippians chapter 2, that Jesus was even at the right hand of God. He gave up then of his position in heaven. He gave up of his life. He sacrificed his life on the cross. When he died for all of mankind. And so we look at that and we say, boy, those are examples of sacrifice. And when we think of sacrifice and self-sacrifice, we don't really think of joy, do we? We think of having to do with having nothing or less than nothing. When we think of sacrifice, we think, well, this means that I have to give it all up and have nothing, and I have to be without, and I have to give up what I have, and I have to hurt, and I hurt because I gave it all away. And that's the thinking, that's the mentality, if you will, of sacrifice. That when we sacrifice, we've given everything up. And so how in the world can you be a full joy in sacrifice? Well, look with me in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 44. You might recall in Matthew 13 that Matthew gives us some 7 parables that are talking about the kingdom. It begins with that one that we're very familiar with the sower. And as he gets into the different parables, he says in verse 44, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. And for joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Did you catch what it said? And for the joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has. He was a full joy by sacrificing. Let's analyze this parable. Let's think about it for a minute. Let us understand that in New Testament times, there was not a Bank of Jerusalem, if you will. There was not a bank in Jerusalem, as a matter of fact. Consequently, what individuals did is that they would hide their money. They would dig a hole somewhere. They'd go out and figure a spot out, and they would dig a hole, and they would put whatever valuables they had that they wanted for safekeeping in a hole. And then they would come back and get it later when they wanted it or when they needed it. I've even said or read rather in history from standpoint that this was not only done, say, if you owned the property, but sometimes it was done on property that you did not own, but it was also done even if you were going to go out to war. You didn't want to take that with you. You would thus bury your treasure with the idea, with the hope you'd go out, you'd fight the war, you'd come back, you'd get what treasure was yours or what treasure you had hid. Jesus says, with regards to the kingdom, he says, here's a man that goes out into a field and he finds a field that has a treasure in it. And he sells all that he has in order to buy the field, in order to claim the treasure. He sacrificed. He sacrificed in order to receive. Now you might say, well, what does that have to do with the kingdom? Well, it has to do with the idea of sacrificing for the kingdom, giving our all, giving everything we have for the kingdom, because it is priceless. But with our lesson tonight, Jesus is saying, look, this man was joyful when he was able to sacrifice, knowing that in the end he was going to gain great good. As Christians, we sacrifice so that in the future we can have great gain. In our Christian life, we may sacrifice ourselves. We may sacrifice our intents. We understand, though, that God has promised that the joy of that sacrifice will be met with great joy. While Jesus will remind us to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, he'll remind us in Luke chapter 6, verse 38, that if we give, it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And so Jesus says, look, when you learn to give, when you learn to sacrifice, when you learn to give not out of the abundance, but when you learn to give your everything for the kingdom, you'll find great joy. And so we know that, as Solomon said in Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 1, that if we cast our bread upon the waters, that we'll find it after many days, that it will not return to us void, that it'll come back home, if you will. You see, when tested and tried, we can find inner joy, and we can find inner peace. Sometimes, if you think about it, the challenge for this joy and the sacrifice is from within. Am I willing to give up? what I have in order for the kingdom's sake. I know its value. I know it's precious. I know it's like the treasure that the man had been looking for all of his life, and he found it. And I know the kingdom is worth everything that I could possibly give for it, that I can sacrifice for it, that I can give of myself and all that I have to and for the Lord. And so sometimes there is then that challenge that is within us, that because you see within us, we say, well, do I really need to give up that? Do I need to chance this? Do I need to chance that? What about this? What about that? I'm not ready to give that up. We're sort of like the rich young ruler that went away sorrowful when Jesus said, give up your possessions, because it said that he had great possessions. He wasn't willing to give them up. He wasn't willing to sacrifice. And so his challenge was within as he battled within. Sometimes our challenge is from others. And so it's from without. Our challenge is from others that are confronting us. If you were in our Bible study this morning, book of Nehemiah, the 6th chapter, you know that there was the want to get Nehemiah to stop rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem. And there was threat made to him, but yet there was also the idea that they wanted him to stop rebuilding the walls. And so they began to talk about him, and they sent a letter that was false. Sanballat lied about Nehemiah. There's a sacrifice, though, that had to be made. Nehemiah was willing to make that sacrifice in order to rebuild the walls, telling everyone, of course, that what Sanballat said was not true. But there was a battle from without. And so sometimes our challenge is from within, and sometimes it's from without. But we become a full joy when we learn really to sacrifice, to give what we have for the kingdom's sake. But then a second full joy, if you will, we can be a full joy, and this time it's found in James chapter 5. In James chapter 5, James is a great book that deals with everyday living. Someone has defined it the Sunday through Saturday book. It's a book that's very practical, that deals with day-to-day aspects. And in James chapter 5, verse 11, James says, indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You've heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. We count them blessed. We count them happy. They have a joy. Who? Those who endure. It's a whole lot easier to start something than it is to maintain it. And many times it's a whole lot easier to start something than it is to finish it. There's the joy and excitement of a new project, a new idea. There's the joy and excitement of what it could bring and what it could be. But when the grind, if you will, kicks in, when the massive undertaking keeps going on, and you keep trying to keep it going, and you got to have the energy and you got to have the enthusiasm that was there at the beginning, but is not there in the middle. You got to have, if you will, a little revival of self sometimes in order to keep going, to persevere. You see, there's always, if you will, on a project or a relationship, there's that honeymoon stage where everybody is wonderful and nothing is too great. Everything is just fantastic. And then there's the reality stage, well, the disappointment stage, really. And the disappointment stage comes when somebody fails. And then the reality kicks in and says, well, we're not all perfect and we all just have to learn to work with one another. Well, think about that with regards to our Christian service. James says you want to be a full joy. You got to stick with it. You got to persevere. You got to get past the reality stage, or get past the disappointment stage, get into the reality stage and say, okay, this is tough, but I'm going to keep on going. Several years ago, two preachers were talking about a project that another brother had started on the internet. And one brother said, I don't believe they're doing that anymore. It started out such a promising project. And the second brother said, yes, it did. And I enjoyed the project. And so the first one said, well, I wonder what happened. And the second one then called the individual's name that was doing the project and said, well, he's a pretty good starter, but he's not much of a finisher. Well, there's a lot of people like that. But when James tells us when and how we can be joyful is by being people that persevere. The call of God is to continue. Don't give up. When you begin the Christian race, you keep running it day in and day out. Not just day in and day out, month in, month out, year in, year out, until you take your last breath. And so the Bible many times tells us to keep running, keep holding on to our faith, keep practicing it. Don't stop. Think about some verses. Titus chapter 1, verse 9, hold fast the faithful words as you have been taught. You may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince those who contradict. And then in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 21, test all things, hold fast to what is good. 1 Corinthians 15:58, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Matthew chapter 10, verse 22, you should be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endures to the end will be saved. Well, we could go on. Those are just a few of the verses that deal with the idea of don't give up, don't stop, keep running the race, keep persevering, keep pushing on. As Christians, we need to remember that very aspect. It's not easy. Once a professional ice skater was asked how they became so proficient in their ability to perform the maneuvers which they did. The ice skater thought for a minute and then told their inquirer, it's simple. Every time I fell, I got up. You see, we keep pushing on. We keep pushing towards bigger and better. We keep pushing towards the end. And so James says, I have got a point for you. If you want to be a full joy, fantastic. He says, you endure. And then it's interesting because James says, you endure looking at Job. Well, if you've studied recently the book of Job, you know that Job lost virtually everything. First couple of chapters, really the first chapter of the book of Job, we get a sense of what Job lost. And he lost health, he lost family, he lost possessions, he lost servants, thus friends. He lost many things. And then he spends the rest of the time, especially Job 3 on, conversing with friends and explaining to them why he was suffering. But if you know in all of that, in all that Job lost, that Job never tempted God, that Job constantly stayed with God. Despite all that he lost, he persevered. He kept pushing onward. You see, we need to be reminded, as Paul would write in Galatians the 6th chapter and verse 9, that we're not to be weary while doing good, for in due season we'll reap if we do not faint. For the man that endures, James reminds us, in verse 12, will receive the crown of life, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give us on that day. And so we have the idea of do what? Keep on going, persevere. Look at Job and see what he did. And know that you need to keep pushing to the end. For none of those things that Paul talked about that he had gone through in Acts 20 moved him, but he counted his life dear to himself, that he said that I may finish the race, that I may finish the course with joy. Dear friends, may we ever remember to finish the course with joy. May we be individuals that are steadfast in our service to God, and in that steadfastness, we find ourselves to be, as James said, full of joy. A third area in which we can be found as being full joys is found in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 15. I thought we'd go to the Old Testament and break it up a little bit. In Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 15, Solomon says it is a joy for the just to do justice, but destruction will come to the workers of iniquity. He says, you want to be a full joy? He says, as a just person, you do justly to others. Well, what's this idea of doing justly to others? It's the idea of doing what's right, treating other people fairly, treating them as we want to be treated, treating them right. You know, sometimes that idea of fairness and doing what's right kind of goes against the idea, well, I'm able to get one up on this person. I'm able to get ahead of this person. But Solomon says, you want to be a full joy? Live squarely with people. Do what's right by them. See, ask yourself, how do I treat people? Do I treat them fairly? Do I treat them equally? Do I treat everybody the same? And when I do something with them and for, am I fair? Am I fair towards all, not just towards the ones I like, not just towards those that are my favorites, but am I fair towards all? And do I do what's right by them and for them and to them? Or do I not? Solomon says the man that deals squarely with people, he's what? He's joyful. There's joy in his heart. Why? Well, it's because he knows that he's done what's right. He knows that in doing what's right and treating others right, that the Lord will treat him right. The Lord will treat him fairly. The Lord will treat him justly. That he knows that how we deal with God and what he's taught us is also right in the sight of God. And when we deal with others that way, he's promised to deal with us. You see, he who loves pleasure will be a poor man, but he who loves wine and oil will not be rich. He who loves pleasure will be a poor man. But he who loves the world, he's not going to be rich. He may think that he's rich. Well, why is he not rich? Because he's not treating people squarely. It's not always easy to treat people fairly. Why? Because sometimes they'll say things against us. Sometimes they'll say things that are tough. Sometimes they'll say things that are mean. Sometimes they'll say things that are unwarranted. Sometimes they'll say things that are not true. Sometimes folks will be super critical of you. And so Solomon reminds us, hey, you want to be a full joy? You want to have fullness of joy in your life? He says, you treat others right. He didn't say, you treat them right if they treat you right. He didn't say, you do your best, and if they treat you right, then you treat them right. It's going to be all right, and you'll be happy. No, he says, you treat them right, and you'll be a full joy. Oh, to be a full joy, full of joy and peace. And we do that by treating others squarely. Let me give you one more. It's found in the book of Acts. It's found in the 8th chapter. We see, beginning in the 8th chapter, we see Saul, who we really know better as Paul. We see him consenting to the death of Christians. And as we see then, as we drift down to verse 4, as the early church was persecuted heavily, it scattered, and Christians they'd been in Jerusalem, but now all of a sudden they're going everywhere. And as they're going everywhere, they're preaching the gospel. And we see there in chapter 8, in verse 8, and there was great joy in that city. What city? Well, the city where the gospel had been preached. The city where they had shared their joy and shared the truth. We need to share the truth with others. We need to tell others the truth. We need to tell others what the Bible says about living the Christian life and doing the right thing. We need to be the sower of good seed that sows the word of God in the hearts of others. When you stop and think about it, so many times we're the only individual that some of our friends ever touch with regards to the truth. The gospel is a message of salvation. It's a message of joy. It's a message of peace and of hope. It's a message of help. And we want to share that with others. And there's joy in those cities that the gospel was shared with. How do we become a full joy? By sharing that gospel with others. By sharing that peace. By sharing that hope. By sharing that God has given us, all that he has given us. And as we share it with others, there is joy. One of the great blessings in my life is to watch Christians grow. To watch Christians grow as individuals, to see their spirituality mature. And to watch that as you begin to teach them the truth. And then as they accept the truth, and then they obey the truth, and then as a child of God, they grow and they continue to grow. And they continue to develop. There's joy then in sharing the truth. So how do we become full joys? Well, we've looked at 4 texts tonight. We sacrifice. We're steadfast in our commitment to the Lord. We deal with others fairly, and we share with others truth. Really, in many ways, not connected, but just 4 verses that the Bible tells us, here's how you become a full joy. The key is found in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 16. Rejoice always. How do you become a full joy? By learning to live the Christian life and living it to the very best of your ability, day by day. I hope that you'll share this with others. I hope that you are a full joy. And I hope that you'll find the joy that God offers by being the individual that God would have you to be. We thank you for listening this evening. We hope that this has been a blessing to you. We hope that you'll have a great week. And until next time, may God bless you and keep you is my prayer. Good evening.